Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Wine with Jimmy channel. I'm your host, Jimmy Smith. Welcome to an educational channel here that looks at WSET revision videos, and it's all hosted by me. So here you have a video on wine production for the D1 of the WSET Level 4. And this is looking at general winemaking options on pressing. As always, if you have any pressing concerns with me, you can get in touch via commenting on this video below, or by the social media you see at the bottom of every slide, or direct at the Wine with Jimmy website. Okay, so without further ado, let's begin looking at the world of pressing. And if you look at things like evidence that have been found in old civilizations, archaeologists have actually unearthed some wonderful old presses. This picture here is actually a 1600-year-old wine press, which was in the sort of the Byzantine area, the 4th century. So this is in Israel. And there's a lot of wine evidence around there, certainly because of the Phoenicians who learned a lot of their skills from Mesopotamia, so Georgia, Iran, Iraq, places like Armenia, and then traveled it across the Mediterranean. And that's what we find across the Mediterranean as well. So we have wine presses in central Iberia, in Valdepenas, which is dated to the Phoenicians. Also, of course, the famous Areni 1 cave, which is in Armenia that has old wine presses in it as well, which dates back thousands of years, very close to the Georgian evidence that we have. So we're talking around 6,000 to 8,000 years of history. Of course, wine's probably been pressed a long time before that, but this is the evidence that we have. And evidence here will show you that presses were made out of stone, using gravity in terms of pressing the grapes. Would have probably more likely be done by foot, and then of course that juice will be collected off in these vats which were built into the ground. So it's quite amazing. But we're not going to talk too much about the historical side of it, of course. Here we're just talking about pressing techniques today in winemaking, and there's only one section to this. So pressing is only one section, as you'll see here. So just looking at this, and in white winemaking, the grapes are almost always pressed to extract the juice from the grapes and to separate the skins from the juice before fermentation, of course. And this is really because the practice today is to make wines which are more, I suppose, modern. I don't like to use the word cleaner. I suppose in terms of the juice, it is cleaner because it hasn't had the skin contact. So to producing what we would consider normal white wines today. But traditionally, in fact, they would be skin contact with white wines, making, of course, what we now today call amber wine or orange wine or skin contact wine. So that is worth a point, just to bear in mind that we are actually moving towards more of a, I suppose, traditional winemaking sense with white wines. In red winemaking, the grapes are typically crushed before fermentation and then pressed after the desired number of days on the skins or at the end of fermentation. So let's talk about our major types of press. So we're going to go through what we call the pneumatic press, the basket press, and then we'll go through a couple of other more minor presses that are mentioned in the Level 4 text. So as you'll see here, the most popular current style of press here is the pneumatic press, and it's very much used across wineries across the world. It's also called, and I've put this on the right-hand side, you may hear some people call it the airbag press. Doesn't sound as modern and as wonderful as a pneumatic press, but an airbag press actually makes it seem a little bit motor vehicle-like. The press is made up of a cylindrical cage. You'll see that here in this text. Let's have a look in this picture. So there is your cylindrical cage, and inside it has this giant inflatable bag, or what you may hear called as a bladder. and that runs down the side or in the middle of this cylindrical cage. Grapes are loaded into the tank, and that's on one side of the bladder, as you'll see in this picture. So here are your grapes being loaded onto one side. The other side of the cage is filled with air, and as the bladder inflates, the grapes are gradually pushed against grates on the side of the cage. There are your grates, as you can see in that picture. And this separates the juice or wine from the skins. And as you see here, it's being collected off at the bottom of this picture. Okay, so the advantages of a pneumatic press are that it can be programmed. Of course, it's very much tied in to computerization and modernization. And it can be programmed to exert different amounts of pressure. So, of course, from light pressure for very gentle and less extraction, and harder pressure for more greater extraction, which can provide eventually different components, different blending components, of course, if that is needed. And it can also be flushed with inert gas before use, and that's to protect the juice or the wine from oxidation. Of course, another thing that connects it to kind of modernization. Now, pneumatic presses are very common in wine regions around the world, certainly in medium to large scale wineries that can afford the initial investment of a pneumatic press. These presses, the things like the Boucher or the Coquard, are expensive initially. So you might find that wineries share them, they rent them if they are small scale, but larger scale wineries will be able to buy these outright, of course. Next up is the basket press. So this, of course, is the more traditional form of pressing, but it is still used today by winemakers, certainly those that have a philosophy for making more traditional style wines. They're also called vertical presses or even champagne presses. A basket, and that's what you'll see here. So you'll see this, where all the green arrows pretty much are. This is the basket. And this basket is filled with grapes, and that's the purple mass you see in your picture. And pressure, that red arrow, is applied from above with a pressing plate. The juice or wine, and it's normally juice, actually runs through gaps or holes in the side of the basket. And that's what's been identified here on this diagram as a filtering trough, and is collected by a tray at the bottom of the press, and that's called the collecting tray, as you will see there. A pipe will then transfer the juice or the wine to another vessel. This could be by gravity, or this could be by pumping. It depends on, once again, the philosophy behind the winemaking team. There is a picture of it in action. One thing to note immediately in comparison to pneumatic presses is that basket presses are not sealed and therefore cannot be flushed with inert gas to avoid oxygen exposure. Some winemakers do believe, however, that it is more gentler than a pneumatic press and can be very much tied into the human influence. However, they generally hold a smaller amount. It's like a small batch, a smaller press load. And they're also, as you can see here, there are 3 gentlemen tending to this one, so they are more labor intensive. So therefore, they are going to be most suited to small wineries making more premium wines, for example. They are found, though, in all wine regions across the world. So there are 2 major types of presses. Now going through some other presses, we have this one, which is the horizontal screw press. So though the next 2 I'm going to say, this one and the one that follows, are less widely used, you'll still find them being used. The horizontal screw press is similar to a basket press mounted horizontally above a rectangular draining tray. You'll see that just off to the bottom of that picture. It is less gentle than any other types of press, therefore it does not tend to be too popular due to the fact that it's a bit more aggressive. This press, as well as pneumatic and basket press, all require batch processing. So that means a batch of grapes goes in and you get a batch of juice or wine out of it. So this can take time, of course. So if you are talking about big volumes of grapes coming in, you need something a bit more flexible than this approach. But if you are a small producer, of course, this is absolutely fine. And if you are a larger producer, this is the one we'll be looking at. The continuous press allows grapes to be continually loaded into the press, as it works by using a screw mechanism. This allows for quicker pressing of larger volumes of grapes. However, it is less gentle than pneumatic and basket presses, and therefore best suited, I think, really to producing more inexpensive high volume wines. Okay, so that's continuous press. And just a little word on computerization. So most of the modern presses, continuous or things like pneumatic presses, will be computerized. The winemaker can program the pressure and the length of the press cycle to, of course, obtain the desired and required results. Applying less pressure will extract less tannin and color from the skins, but will result in smaller volumes of juice or wine. Therefore, there can be a compromise between the quality of the juice and the wine and volume of the wine that can be made. A longer press cycle will extend, of course, the contact between the skins and the juice or the wine, which extracts more aroma and flavor, but of course can extract much more color and tannin. It depends on what you are looking to obtain. And just a word on what is left behind. And this is what we call the solids, which is called the pomace. So this is, of course, important if you're looking at things like grappa production, or even things like the ripasso method in Veneto, in Valpolicella. But really, this is left behind. It may be used for composting or sold on to other agriculture. Okay, so that brings me to the conclusion here of the pressing section for the D1. I hope you found this very useful. I hope you're doing exceptionally well and tickety-boo. If you do have any comments, questions, or concerns, remember pressing comments. You can pop them in the comment section below here on the YouTube video, get in touch by social media you see at the bottom of every slide, or direct at winewithjimmy.com. Otherwise, if you do find yourself in wonderful London town, here in old Blighty, come and see us. I've got schools and bars, so come and see me for a class, a glass, or a bottle. I've been Jimmy Smith. Thank you.